Hello folks, my name is Mark, this is Why I Hate the World. How you guys doing? So this is a video about cultural appropriation, which if you've never heard about that, it's when someone from a dominant culture either engages in an act or adopts elements of a subservient culture, I guess you would call it. And so I think, there is a little bit to it. I can see how some people would be offended when they see pieces like bits and pieces of their culture being commercialized and used by other people that don't know the meaning behind it and stuff like that. But for the most part, I think it's just another thing that, social justice warriors seek out to be pissed off about. I mean, a lot of it just seems to be baloney to me, but there is a little bit, it's not as cut and dry as a lot of people think. So what does it mean? Well, there's two kinds of cultural appropriation. The first kind is like what you would call cultural dominance, I guess, and that's where if you have, like, say, a dominant culture that pieces of the dominant culture filter down to a subservient culture beneath it. So let's say, for example, in the 19th century, colonial America, say, forcing Indian children into boarding schools, things like that. But not just that, it's not just by force. It can also be something that a subservient, less dominant culture sort of absorbs on their own. Another example would be in ancient Egypt, right? You had stylings of, pyramids and their religion and stuff like that. That kind of filtered down to, there was another society that lived beneath ancient Egypt called Kush, right? That you don't really hear a lot about in the West unless you're a scholar, right? And it's basically that was another civilization that was south of Egypt, and they adopted the styling, the art styling and the religion of Upper Egypt, you know what I mean, of their northern neighbors, right? But they would build pyramids that were like really small, instead of building like huge giant skyscraper type pyramids, they'd build little tiny house sized ones and stuff like that. That's another example of cultural dominance. The other form is what you would call cultural exploitation, right? And this is where people get pissed off. So they see things like, for example, last year, a lot of the social justice people got really mad because of Halloween costumes. They got pissed off because, like, guys were dressing up in sombreros and that kind of thing, or dressing up in geisha outfits or whatever, and they were mad at that because that's supposedly cultural appropriation, right? And and the thing is, I first off, I don't really agree with this concept, because in social justice circles, in order for it to be cultural appropriation, just like their definition of racism, there has to be an oppressed party. So just like how they have redefined racism to say that power plus privilege equals racism, that's the same way that they've defined cultural appropriation. So it can only go one way. So it only goes from the culture that's in power taking elements from an oppressed culture, right? And that's really, that's like, if it's not, it's not the other way around. Like, if an oppressed culture takes pieces from from their oppressor, then that's not appropriation, and it's bullshit. It's basically, I don't agree with that at all, right? Now, I can understand, though, like I said at the beginning of this video, that people get mad at that kind of thing, and I can understand why. You're a minority, you have your distinct culture, right? And then you see people that who you perceive as oppressing you in one way or another, act out and take pieces of what, you consider sacred, right? And I can see how that can offend people. So yeah, case in point, you're Mexican, you see a guy dressed up in a sombrero with bullets, eating a frickin' taco, and on Halloween and shit, that might make you mad. You're a black person, you see somebody with a big afro and a pick with a fist in the back of it and blackface on Halloween, that would piss you off too. I mean, I'm not saying that, it's complete. You know, it's not, you know, it doesn't exist. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. I am saying that I think people look for it where it's not there, you know. And I also think that it's kind of hard to define, you know, because some people, it seems to me, take like the smallest little bit of cross-cultural, you know, dissemination and get mad at it. So what do I mean by that? Well, example is I read something recently about a group that wanted to protest a yoga studio because they were teaching yoga without the religious component. So, you know, yoga is not just exercises. Like here in the West, to us, it's like just basically another workout. You know, you do yoga, there are different poses, you hold them for 20 seconds, whatever, you know. But there's actually a religious component to yoga. It's actually a form of worship, right? Or at least that's how it started, you know. And, you know, I don't really see that as a form of cultural appropriation, you know. Like it's more like a cross, you know, cultural exchange, really. You know, I mean, when does it become offensive? That's the hard part, right? Like, is it because, like, okay, like for example, if a white woman wears cornrows, is that cultural appropriation? Yeah, no, maybe. I mean, you know, does that mean that only black people are allowed to like hip hop, right? Only black people are allowed to dress as in that style. You know, is that? I don't think so. I don't think that's really fair. You know, is your or another example? Let's say the Washington Redskins. You know, you have that's been controversial for a while. That logo for the football team, right? Well, the word redskin is actually like a racial, you know, slur. At least it was back in the day. You know, it still is, I guess. You know, and but a lot of people defend that, saying it's traditional and it's not really, you know, it's not really a slur or whatever. I mean, you could say, yeah, that, you know, that could be an example of cultural appropriation, right? What's another example? Let's say, oh, here's a good one. Cherahunkies, right? Now, if you don't know what a Cherahunky is, it's a white person who may have, you know, 187th American Indian in them from some point 200 years ago, and then who identifies really like strongly with this heritage, you know, and they'll go to sweat lodges and they'll like go and do all the prayers and the dances and shit like that and like wear Indian jewelry, when in real life they like have very little connection to that actual culture beyond like some ancestor they had. I mean, shit, I myself, I'm like, you know, 1/16th American Indian on my mom's side, you know, back in like 1897 or some shit. You know what I mean? Would that be considered cultural appropriation, right? Maybe. But here's the question. Well, at what point is it not? So how much Native American blood do you need to have before it becomes not being offensive anymore, you know? Are you, I mean, seriously, like, can you have like one grandfather that's Native American? You know, can you be half Native American? Can you be an eighth Native American? Like, at what point does it become like, okay, well, you're not, you know, you're just too white to like, you know, enjoy your heritage? When does that become the thing? So that's the thing. It's like all this shit is way up in the air. I've said before, you know, in these videos that I'm actually half white. I'm actually half Filipino, right? And so would it be wrong for me to like enjoy Filipino culture, right? Am I only allowed to enjoy half of it? I mean, that's the thing. It's like, you know, when does it become offensive, I guess? Who can judge that? You know, I don't know. I don't think so. And it doesn't seem to go the other way around. That's another thing. So, you know, should we get mad at people in Japan because they wear business suits and ties and not kimonos? You know, well, are they culturally appropriating things from the Western world? Or does that just not count because, you know, they're more I mean, seriously, you know, does it go that way? Like, you know, so I just think the whole thing is like, you know, it's just, there is some, you know, you have to be, you know, you should be mindful when you do these things. You know, you don't want to offend people, right, by misrepresenting bits of their culture, you know, and I can understand that. But at the same time, it's like, I think people just read too much into this stuff, you know. You know, it's not racist, or I'm not misappropriating somebody's culture when I go and eat a Mexican pizza, for example, or if I go to Taco Bell, I'm not misappropriating Mexican culture there. Or if I go like eat sushi, just because I don't like if I go to a sushi restaurant and the guy who's like making the sushi is Latino instead of Japanese, that's not offending people like that. Or, even if I wear a Halloween costume, and I dress up as somebody, well, let's say, at what point does that become offensive? Like, well, what if I like dress up as a samurai? Well, what if I dress up as one that's like really detailed with like authentic armor and all this other shit? Am I still like appropriating their culture because I'm not Japanese? Does that mean that only Japanese people are allowed to dress up as samurais on Halloween? I think it's just like people just read too much of this shit and everybody should just relax. So, anyway, adios.